In the 5th year of marriage, the respect between us had turned into mutual disdain. He found another girl, maybe younger and prettier than me, better at pleasing him. I got married for happiness, and now I want a divorce. But when I rang the death knell of this marriage, why was he the one crying and saying he regretted it? Last week, after a dinner with my husband Charles, my shoelace suddenly came undone in the parking lot. I knelt to fix it and asked him to wait for me. Before the words could leave my mouth, he had already walked far ahead. When he realized I was left behind, he was impatient. The first reaction was to blame me. "Anna, how long are you going to dawdle?" he scolded me. I tightened the grip on my shoelace. He noticed and said, "You are 30 this year, not 3. Are you getting more demanding as you get older, or still want to act cute for me to tie them?" "Anna, behaving like this makes me a little uncomfortable." Without looking at me, he stood there, looking at his phone. As if softened by something he read, he turned around. I stayed still, feeling confused. How could I be hurt so easily without saying a word? I wondered who was on the other end of his phone. With long legs and large strides, he used to slow down on purpose when we were dating, walking side by side. When did he change? After we got married, things seemed to be getting better. Always driving wherever we went and more people around us. Occasionally walking together, he would always be way ahead, leaving me far behind. He got more impatient with me, stopped accompanying me on outings, stopped cooking for me. Even with more properties purchased, he started coming home less. The busy life made him grow more distant, turning what was once close and intimate into something estranged. Until later, I realized that it wasn't that men couldn't do certain things. It was just that he no longer wanted to do them for me. A week later, on my birthday, while shopping with my mother, I saw Charles. "Look, Charles is so caring. He came to pick you up when you went out shopping." My mother beamed, ready to greet him. But the next moment, a young and pretty girl appeared in front of him. We were so close, we could even hear their conversation. "How can you be so absent-minded?" Charles knelt down and gently tied her shoelaces. My husband said to the other girl, "What would you do without me?" The girl coyly replied, "You better keep an eye on me, Charles." He chuckled affectionately, "Wait for me here. I'll go to the bathroom." Without seeing us, he walked straight away. I stood there, unable to say a word. I recognized the girl. I met Charles in our youth, married for 5 years. Even though the passion and intense love were gone, I always thought we had become an indispensable part of each other's lives. Until half a year ago, Charles took pity on Betty, a secretary from a poor background, and employed her against the regulations. Initially, Charles would often complain to me that Betty was dull and kept messing up the work. Worried, I suggested he transfer her to a different position given her limited education and perspectives. To my surprise, Charles looked at me disbelievingly and said, "Anna, you can't be so shallow-minded. Betty may have a lower education, but how can you deprive her of the opportunity to climb up?" I didn't mean it that way, but he refused to listen to my explanation. Later, I heard that he kept her by his side, taking her to various social events, showing her the world, acting as generously as a philanthropist. Even when we were together, he would receive calls from Betty, either about work mistakes, or accidentally locking herself in the office. She was becoming his priority in everything he did. He always said, "Betty needs me." But can one's needs justify reaching this extent between a man and a woman? "I'll kill you, you homewrecker." Before I could react, my mother had already charged out like an arrow released from a bow. She slapped the girl hard in the bustling mall. Betty screamed, "Who's this crazy person?" and started grabbing my mother. Seeing this, something broke in my mind, and I pushed through the crowd, standing between my mother and the girl. Betty's expression changed immediately when she saw my face. "Ms. Anna," she said, her face turning pale, "I know you have power and influence, but how can you falsely accuse me like this?" More and more people around us started whispering and discussing about me and my mother. With a cold gaze, I stared at her and said, "Betty, you don't need to provoke class hatred. I know your family background is not good, and you want to climb up, but relying on someone else's husband to take a shortcut, and not being able to distinguish between right and wrong, this isn't about education, it's about manners." I didn't want to waste my breath on her. I walked ahead with my mother, shoving her shoulder without force as we passed her. "Betty." Charles's voice came from behind. He took long strides, focused only on Betty. As we brushed past each other, I could even smell the scent of detergent on his suit that I had ironed for him this morning. But now, his eyes were filled with disgust and anger as he looked at me. "Anna, why are you so vicious?" He was burning with anger. Disappointed, he said, "Betty is just my work partner. You're unfairly accusing a girl, even resorting to violence. Isn't that too far?" Betty held onto Charles's clothes and said pitifully, "I'm fine." Ms. Anna just got confused. "Just apologize to me." I didn't have a chance to speak before my mother, in a fit of anger, rushed up and scolded, "Dream on." She was shaking with anger, raised her hand to hit her. "Enough!" Charles roared and pushed my mother away. She was pushed to the ground by this, her chest heaving, struggling to breathe. "Mom!" My pupils shrank, crying out as I rushed over. Charles continued to mock. "I didn't use much force. No need to make a scene here." Turning his back to us, still holding his secretary, he coldly said, "It doesn't matter who comes, Anna. You must apologize to Betty today." Halfway through his words, he turned to see me in tears, suddenly stunned. The next second, he finally noticed my mother on the ground, with a pained expression. How could this happen? His face went white at once, finally letting go of Betty. "Quick, call an ambulance." My mother had always loved Charles. We grew up together, and since I was a child, Charles had dinner at my house every night. My mother always treated him like her own son. I once joked that she cared more about Charles than me. "You're married. Since he calls me Mom, you are both my children." My mother said this with a gentle expression, and I saw a young Charles quietly tear up. He was an orphan, raised by relatives, and I thought he would be grateful. In the hospital, the doctor's expression was sympathetic. "Your mother has been diagnosed with advanced stomach cancer. She may not have many days left. It's best to stay calm and avoid major emotional stress." I was struck like lightning, standing by the bed, unable to move. No wonder she hadn't been out much lately, and sounded particularly weak on the phone. This time, if it weren't for my birthday, she wouldn't have come out to accompany me shopping. My mother weakly smiled. "You found out. Why didn't you tell me about this?" I cried, holding her hand. "Let's go to the hospital, to a big hospital. With today's advanced technology, it can definitely be cured." My mother slowly, firmly shook her head. My father passed away early, and she raised me alone. At that time, she was so tall in my eyes, shielding me from the wind and rain. Later, when I married Charles, I thought she could finally start to enjoy her life. Seeing her trapped in a bland hospital bed tore at my heart. "I have no regrets in my life." She lovingly touched my head. "The only thing I worry about is you," she said. "Anna, leave him. Don't waste your time on someone who doesn't love you." I wiped away the tears, gritting my teeth. "Okay, I'll divorce Charles." Before I could finish my sentence, a furious male voice sounded at the door. "Anna." The man hurried over, grabbing my shoulders. "Take back those words," he said. "At a time like this, why are you still being unreasonable and stubborn? We've been married for so many years. I haven't made any fundamental mistakes. Just because I went out of the office with a female colleague, you want a divorce." Charles's expression was unpleasant, blaming me for every word. I didn't understand. He was the one who made the mistake, but it seemed like it was my fault. My eyes stung, and I said slowly, "What kind of female colleague needs your help to tie her shoelaces?" "Charles, don't think it's not cheating just because you didn't sleep with her. Where is your heart? You know it." Because of this, Charles looked unreasonable. He turned to my mother. "Mom, are you going to let her be unreasonable?" My mother's eyes turned red, refusing to look at him, trembling lips, scolding, "Get out." Charles wanted to say something else, but I grabbed my bag and pushed him out. At the hospital door, he tightly held my wrist. "Divorce? Don't even think about it." I was shocked by his ruthlessness in his words. The next moment, Betty stumbled over from the other end of the corridor. "Charles, I think I sprained my foot." Staring coldly at her, I said, "If you sprained it, why didn't you see a doctor? Are you here specifically to find someone else's husband, thinking it has a miraculous effect on your injury?" It's not what I meant." Betty lifted her foot to leave. "Ms. Anna doesn't like me. I'll go away." But the next moment, she pretended to be unstable and conveniently fell into Charles's arms. Charles timely held her, pointing the conversation towards me. "Anna, why are you being so aggressive? Betty got hurt because of you. Don't you feel any guilt or remorse?" He seemed disappointed, puzzled. "You used to be very kind. Maybe you've been misjudging me all along," I said. "But now you can still change your mind. We're getting divorced. Don't bring up this matter again." Charles was stung by the word. His eyes grew cold. "Come home tonight, we'll talk." With that, he took Betty's arm and hurried away. But how could he ask me to come home? He spoke so nobly about his emotional affair, but at this moment, he only cared about Betty, with no concern for the mother he pushed over. There will be no more home for me with this man. From now on, wherever my mother is, that's where my home will be. My mother refused treatment. She said, "As you age, you always think of returning to your roots. Before, I stayed here for you and Charles, but now, I just want to go back to my hometown to rest well." My eyes were sore, crying and agreeing with her. We rushed back to the small town that day, where the medical resources were limited, basically just waiting for death. But she liked it here, and after coming back, her whole demeanor was much calmer. Several times, I woke up crying in my dreams. I was about to lose my mother. The doctor said she must not be stressed, during this period, to help the old lady pass her last days peacefully. I always kept in mind, accompanying her carefully. Charles called me many times, asking where I was, telling me to come back immediately, but I ignored him completely. But in this world, if you don't go looking for trouble, trouble will come looking for you. That day, I left my phone on the counter and went to the bathroom to wash the fruit. Halfway through washing, I heard my mother's exclamation, "Mom, what's wrong?" I rushed out to see her holding my phone, the other hand covering her chest in pain. "Anna," her eyes were red and she trembled as she asked, "How could he treat you like this?" I took the phone from her hands. On the screen was a photo sent by Betty, taken in the bathroom, where she was smiling slyly at the mirror, her young face full of provocation and pride. She was wearing a pure white satin nightgown, and on her slender neck, a sapphire necklace was sparkling. The necklace was a wedding gift from my mother. The nightgown was mine, and this bathroom was in my and Charles' house. In the mirror's reflection, I saw Charles' figure. She sent a message smugly, "Ms. Anna, while you're away." I reluctantly helped Charles take care of things. As a thank you, he gave me a gift. Isn't that appropriate? I felt like I was in an ice cave. How dare he? This house was our marital home, bought by my mother with part of her savings when we were poor. We couldn't even afford a decent sofa back then, but we could hold hands and stroll through the flea market, making our days enjoyable. We were full of hopes for the future back then. As time went on, and things got better and better, he got rid of a lot of old furniture for the sake of aesthetics and grandeur, along with all those memories. I had seen how he loved me. In the wedding vows, there was a line that said, "Whether in good times or bad, in riches or poverty, in health or sickness, I will always love and cherish you." It was like a joke. How could he treat my daughter so well? And I got this in return. Tears shimmered in my mother's eyes as she held my hand. How could I have agreed to marry you to such a man? The next moment, as if unable to bear the emotional shock, she suddenly collapsed on the ground. "Mom," I nearly cried all my tears by the door of the ICU. At that moment, Charles called. "Anna, are you tired of running away from home?" His voice from the phone was so cold. Anger rose in my heart. "How could you have an affair at home, Charles? Do you have no conscience? That's my mother's house." Charles hesitated for a moment before becoming angry. "What are you talking about? There's a plumbing issue at Betty's house, so she used your things. You have so much more than her. Why can't you be kind?" Kind? My mother was so kind. What did she get in return? I said every word slowly and clearly. "Now, get her out of my house immediately. Don't touch my things. I find them dirty." Charles' rough breathing came from the phone. He said coldly, "Anna, my patience has limits. Either come back immediately and we'll talk, or don't force me to come find you." Then, I heard Betty's voice coming from the phone. "Charles, how do you use this water heater?" She spoke playfully. "I'm all soaked." Charles hung up the phone. Sitting in the hospital corridor, I felt a chill throughout my body. At this moment, they were having a good time in my house, and I could only wait helplessly here for news. Shouldn't it be the mother who is supposed to go to hell, not me? Perhaps my prayers worked. As the doctor came out of the room at that moment, the patient had been saved. Just as the huge boulder in my heart was about to drop, the doctor's next words hit me. "But she's been stimulated now, and her condition has deteriorated severely." He looked at me with pity, patting my shoulder. "Ask her where she wants to go, what food she enjoys. These are just a few days left." I couldn't stand up, collapsing on the ground, tears streaming down. I pushed her wheelchair, and took my mother back to the small house, where we lived in my childhood. It seemed that as soon as we returned home, she relaxed, with no endless medications to take, no needles to endure, no unpleasant smell of disinfectant, and no doctors with grim faces. Only peaceful times and countless memories. There was always a tranquility in her face, sleeping most of the time, rarely waking up. Until that day, her eyes regained clarity. "I remember when you were so small." She reached out, gesturing in the air with her fragile hand. "Whenever we made something delicious at home, you always wanted to share some with Charles, who lived next door. He was a lonely little boy. I pitied him, so I wanted to take care of him a bit more. But I didn't expect that, by taking care of him, I dragged my daughter into it." Her aged hand rested on mine. "It's Mom's misjudgment that harmed you." I shook my head. "No, you've done nothing wrong." She smiled at me, took a labored breath, and said, "Good child. I really want to taste the candy from the west side of town again." My tears flowed immediately. When my father was still alive, he often bought candy from that shop for me and Mom, calling us the Big Princess and the Little Princess. After my father passed away, she single-handedly held up the entire household, and even when she bought candy, it was only for me. She was once just a young girl. I'll go buy it. You must wait for me to come back. Her loving nod filled my heart. I dashed out. The town was small, with the candy store just a few hundred meters away. I ran almost the whole way there, stumbling along the path. Just as I was carrying the candy, about to arrive at my doorstep, a familiar car suddenly stopped in front of me. Anna. Charles's face was as cold as ice as he stepped out of the car. Do you really need to dwell on our past like this? Do you know how long I've been looking for you? I was taken aback, only then remembering how often I used to go buy candy with Charles in the past. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of me, took the bag of candy from me, and said, "We were too poor in the past, could only afford this kind of stuff. Anna, if you just come back and apologize, the place by my side is still yours. We can reconcile and start anew. Give it back to me." I felt like a provoked little beast, reaching out to grab the bag, angrily saying, "Charles, it's because of this kind of shabby stuff that you had to rely on my mother's charity in the past. Who wants to be your wife? I can't wait to divorce immediately and get away from both you and Betty." My words hit a nerve. His face immediately darkened. "Have I been too good to you in the past, that you've become so unreasonable?" He waved his hand, and 2 assistants got out of the car immediately. "You must come back with me, no matter what happens today." With that, the 2 tall assistants, regardless of my struggles, forcibly pushed me into the car. "Charles," I thought of my mother at home, shouting hoarsely, "Are you crazy? Let me out of the car." Charles sat in the car expressionless, and ordered the driver to go. I helplessly slapped the car window, tears streaming down my face. "I'm begging you, please let me get off. My mom has cancer. She's not doing well." "What?" Charles looked at me in shock. I hoped he still had a shred of compassion left, remembering how good my mother had always been to him. But he said, "Anna, are you willing to lie about this for the sake of divorce?" "Charles," I murmured, "don't let me hate you." Perhaps seeing me cry so miserably, Anna hesitated for a moment and then let one of the assistants get out of the car to check the situation. "I'll make sure they bring my mom back too," Anna said. "She has suffered for so long. Why would you bring her back now?" The car slowly started moving, tears falling down one by one, the unrest in my heart spreading continuously. In that moment, I really wanted to kill him. Shortly after, a call came in from the assistant. Charles picked up the phone, his expression gradually darkening. "Idiot, hurry up and take her to the hospital." After hanging up the phone, he immediately told the driver to turn around. "How's my mom?" I pounced on him, desperately questioning, "Why don't you say anything?" Anna, at this moment, lowered her head, avoiding my gaze. I rushed into the hospital. My mother's body was already covered with a white sheet. No one knew what she thought in her final moments. My mother, a woman who raised me on her own, the strongest woman in the world. Did she wonder why her daughter hadn't returned yet? Did she keep trying, hoping to see me one last time? Did she have anything to say to me? Any unfulfilled wishes? I would never get answers again. Charles stumbled in. His eyes were red, trembling as he said, "I didn't know. I didn't know." The next moment, he grabbed my shoulders forcefully, kneeling down and asking desperately, "Why didn't you tell me?" My tears had run dry, and I looked at him coldly. "When did I tell you? When you pushed Betty down for the sake of her? When Betty moved into the house she bought? Or just now, when you unreasonably accused me of lying?" Charles, facing a thunderbolt, took a few steps back, then knelt down with a thud. I believed, after living together for so many years, his remorse and tears at this moment were sincere. But it's too cheap. I looked down on him and said, "Please leave. My mother wouldn't want to see you." On the day of my mother's funeral, heavy rain poured down. I held a black umbrella, tears in my eyes as I looked at the photo on the tombstone. "Mom, you can rest assured," I murmured, "from now on, I'll live well on my own." In the pouring rain, a figure stumbled towards me. Charles hadn't brought an umbrella, drenched all over, looking as miserable as a drowned rat. "Anna, I know everything now." He clenched his phone so hard, veins popping out, the screen showing a provocative message from Betty. Through gritted teeth, he promised, "I'll make her pay. You believe me?" I didn't care, just lowered my eyes and softly said, "Go." Red-eyed, Charles stared at me for a long time, then knelt down, bowed to my mother, and left straight away. A few days later, I found out Betty's whereabouts. Charles turned into a completely crazed person, printing out all his chat records with Betty and sending them to all her relatives and friends. He used to pity this girl for her background, knowing she came from the countryside, with conservative parents almost making her drop out of school to get married. So he felt her life was miserable and wanted to be her support. Now, all these things had become blades aimed at Betty. In that envelope, snidely written, "Thank you, Betty, for personally taking care of me when my wife wasn't at home." In the chat records, It was all the photos Betty often sent him in the past. Her in the steamy bathroom, taking photos of herself wrapped in a towel saying, "I'm so silly. I can't even figure out how to use the water heater." She lied alone in bed, trying to find the most flattering angles for her selfies, saying, "I'm so scared when I sleep alone." She pretended to be drunk, saying, "How could Charles bear to let me attend social functions alone?" All these acts were endless, but the most ridiculous thing was not her pretense. It was that all along, Charles understood that she had crossed the line, but he still enjoyed the feeling of being praised and depended on by a young girl, not taking the initiative, not rejecting. Every time I asked, he would self-righteously say, "Just chatting, just helping out. She needs me more than you do," because as long as it didn't escalate to sleeping together, it wasn't considered cheating. He could shamelessly enjoy the excitement and ambiguity. Men actually understand everything. Betty's parents were furious. It was said that her mother fainted as soon as she opened the letter. Her reputation in her hometown was completely ruined. Anyone related to her in any way would be gossiped about whenever they went out. She was labeled as the family's kept woman. And when Charles went crazy, he didn't even spare his own company. Her photos were sent to everyone's email, and everyone knew about her affair with a married man. One late night, she made a phone call to me. "Ms. Anna, I was foolish before," she said, her voice trembling with tears. "Can you please ask Charles to spare me? I really didn't mean to upset your mother." She said, "I promise, I will never bother Charles again, never disturb your lives again." I held my phone expressionless and said, "Betty, an apology is just a matter of lips touching, but my mother will never come back. I haven't asked you to atone with your life. That's already being generous, isn't it?" I stood by the window, gazing at the distant dark clouds. "Everything that happened to you is a result of your own actions. A person should take responsibility for their own mistakes." It was said that the next day, Betty's parents went to the company. In front of everyone, they gave her a severe beating, calling her a natural slut and whore, saying they spent money to educate her. But she turned out like this. Betty, disheveled and miserable, was brought back to her hometown by her parents. It was also said that later she was forcibly married off by her parents. Due to her ruined reputation, she could only marry to a more remote place and ended up with an old man with a limp, exchanging a hefty bridal gift for her family. I thought she'd come out of hardship, seen the mountains and rivers, the bustling city, only to fall back into hell. It must be even more painful. But she doesn't deserve pity. Charles came to see me. He looked somewhat disheveled, still wearing the suit from the funeral, rumpled and emitting a foul smell. His handsome face, now disheveled, with dark circles and stubble, looked like a tramp. He cautiously said to me, "Anna, I've avenged my mom. Look, I don't love Betty at all. I was momentarily confused. Can you forgive me?" I looked at this despicable person, and couldn't understand why I ever fell in love with him in the past. "I won't forgive you," I said. "Me and my mother will never forgive you." His shoulders slumped, and I handed him the divorce agreement that I had drafted long ago. "Sign it, Charles." He trembled all over, begging me, "Can we not divorce?" He walked back and forth in the room, his emotions running high. "We've been married for 5 years, Anna. No matter if Betty or anyone else comes around, you have always been my only wife. Remember, we chose this house together, this bed, this furniture, the cups we use are all couple sets. We went through so much hardship together. Why must it end up like this now? I didn't cheat. I really didn't." At this point, he still tried to use memories of the past to manipulate me. I looked at him, and with each word, I said, "Do you remember when you decided to come to the big city to make a name for yourself? Everyone doubted you. Only me and my mom believed in you. You said we were your only family, that in the future you would make sure we live a good life. Charles, did you or did you not say that? I gambled my youth with you for a better tomorrow, but did I win? Did you tell me I won? Now you want to bring up the past. When you were fooling around with Betty outside, accusing me of being intolerant and not as gentle, when you started to be unfaithful, why is it that you never once considered the past?" Charles looked ashen-faced, frozen in place. After a long time, I finally heard him speak hoarsely. "In the future, I'll change for sure. But I don't want a future with you." I looked into his eyes and softly said, "After my mother's death, I wanted to kill you at one point. I wanted you dead. Don't you understand? You can choose not to divorce, but from now on, every bite you take, every drop of water you drink, every moment you spend in this house, you need to be on high alert for me, because there will be a moment when I truly can't control myself." Charles, do you want to see that day? He seemed to have finally reached his breaking point. He buried his head in his arms, crying out hoarsely, and I sat across from him, expressionless, waiting for his emotions to calm down. then handed him a pen. In the end, he signed the divorce papers. The agreement required Charles to leave with nothing. He didn't argue. The house went to me, along with a few cars and other properties under his name. I didn't look back. I sold all these assets, turned them into cash, then went back to the small town and opened a little candy shop. The life in the small town is peaceful and soothing, healing the wounds in my heart. Life doesn't always have to be about being rich and famous. A small shop, a corner of blue sky, and a cat can make a person happy and content. I often visit my mother's grave to chat about recent events with her. I think if she were still alive, she would be proud. Unfortunately, life doesn't have many ifs. In my second year in the small town, I fell in love with a man who frequented the candy store. He was a local, returned to start a business after college, with simple family ties and kind parents. He may not be as wealthy as Charles, but he was caring, loving, attentive, and gentle towards me. One day, as we were walking in the countryside, my shoelace suddenly came untied. Sorry, wait a moment. I started to bend down to tie it, but before I could, he kneeled down and tied it for me. Looking at him, I asked, "Don't you mind me being clumsy and pampered?" Surprised, he replied, "Why would I mind? You are my beloved. It's just a small thing. I'm willing to do it for you." My heart fluttered, and almost teary-eyed, I gently held his hand. "Let's get married." Our wedding was simple, only inviting our closest friends and family. The MC asked, "From now on, through good times and bad, through richness and poorness, through health and sickness, does the groom promise to love the bride forever?" Blushing, he squeezed my hand tightly. "I do." Tears of happiness rolled down my cheeks. That evening, amidst the guests' red envelopes, I found an anonymous letter. It contained no money, but a wedding ring. I was momentarily silent. Charles apparently wasn't doing well. His relationship with Betty ended. His affair with his secretary became public at work. He was soon fired and left with nothing. Despite finding a new job later, Betty's parents were relentless in harassing him, extorting money. How he found out about my wedding under such circumstances was unknown. Perhaps that ring was one of the few valuable things he had left, maybe. "Anna," my husband entered the room, "want to grab a bite?" "What are you looking at?" I smiled, not showing any concern, casually threw the red envelope and the ring in the trash. "They are not important." Months later, a mutual friend told me about Charles's final fate. It was around the day of our wedding when he lost it and attacked that couple. She sobbed over the phone, saying he was shouting, blaming us, and was eventually taken by the police, covered in blood, acting like a lunatic. At the end, she hesitated. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said all that. Are you okay?" I watched my husband doing the chores, the shop filled with the scent of candies, our cat napping peacefully. "I'm fine. I don't care anymore." I put away that failed marriage, discarded along with the memories of the past. Who hasn't encountered a few rotten people when they were young? I have a happy and fulfilling life, with endless possibilities ahead. As for him, he's destined for hell. We have no connection anymore.